Gramzaphat. Harris closed his eyes and savored the last drop of his venison ragu soup with forest mushrooms. The remains of the large bowl, made of brown bread, in which it had been served, sat temptingly before him. Resisting the urge to consume the rest of the bowl, he instead liberated a cigar from the breast pocket of his green velvet jacket and held it reverently aloft amidst the gathering dusk. Gently falling into a blissful reverie, Harris meditated on the many splendors that the 90s had already ushered into his life, as well as those soon to unfold. With these thoughts in mind, he expelled a gentle sigh of satisfaction. It promised to be the perfect end to a glorious October's evening in Budapest. A vaguely ominous scraping sound on the steps leading up to the grill terrace returned Harris to the present, a dimension of existence he had always found particularly distasteful. Indeed, he had studied history at university primarily so he could live during any time he wanted, thus avoiding the grubby and often disappointing tediousness of the present. Explaining this to his classmates had given rise to blank stares, a phenomenon that would become depressingly familiar in later years. Fortunately, recent events had accomplished in the everyday world what he had previously tried to bring about between his ears, turning the clock back to the 19th century. With relish, he had abandoned his native land and even his native century to traverse the rugged wilderness now emerging from the deep freeze of history. A free man at last, he eagerly anticipated collecting his fair share of life's goodies. Sadly, the thawing of the Cold War had also unleashed a new specter that now haunted Central Europe. The frumpen proletariat, he called it, stirred to life in a witch's brew of multiculturalism, political correctness, grim professionalism, and appalling fashion sense. These frumptocrats, the rough beasts of a newly emerging first world kleptocracy, now lumbered across the landscape of the New World Order in great numbers, often at the taxpayer's expense, disguised as aid workers and development experts. He called them uninformed stumblebums abroad in the dark, an admittedly ungracious though largely apt description. In fact, just a few days earlier, on the flight to Budapest, Harris had observed with horror a particularly noxious exemplar of this dangerous phenomenon. With mangy braces gripping her pointy little teeth and hair plastered down like a bottle cap, this aesthetic nightmare looked for all the world like a bleached turnip in culottes. She and her husband, a rather handsome Asian man, were each reading a copy of the airline magazine. Harris laughed behind his teeth as he waited for her to get to the article about how Hungary had become the new center of the European pornography industry. He did not have long to wait. Soon her sausage lips twisted into a moist snarl of ferocious disgust. She slammed the magazine down on her fish-belly thighs and barked, "This is disgusting! How can they print this trash?" Ripping the magazine from her husband's hands, she shouted for the flight attendant to remove the offending printed matter from her sight. The husband acquiesced with a blank, emotionless stare. Harris felt sorry for this man, condemned through a monumental error in judgment to a lifetime of being dragged around the world by an angry white elephant. Even a mahout on the streets of Bangkok has a better life than that, he thought. Reluctantly focusing his attention back on the present, Harris spied a Tweety bird hairdo bobbing upwards in his general direction. Suspended beneath it was a 30-something female, the evident source of the ominous scraping sound that had so rudely interrupted his reverie. Tricked out in LL Bean leisure attire and pearly white teeth, both presumably held over from the 80s. Resenting the intrusion on his splendid isolation, especially as she was not at all his type, Harris nevertheless had to concede that Tweety was rather attractive in that vim and vigor sort of way, and in any case a decisive improvement over the turnip on the airplane. With his interest thus aroused sufficiently to suspend his better judgment, Harris feigned indifference and slipped the cigar back into his jacket pocket, on the off chance of a romantic interlude. He then stuck his nose into a well-worn copy of Rebours and earwigged for an opening. "Do you speak English?" she asked the aproned waiter. The accent was decisively American, Harris noted despondently. "Yes, little," he replied. "How many grams of fat are in a bowl of your savory venison soup?" "Gramzaphat?" asked the waiter. "Yes, fat. F-A-T. Do you understand fat?" "Fat?" "Yes. How many grams of fat in the venison soup?" "Gramzaphat?" "Yes, grams of fat." "You want soup?" At this point, Harris stifled an explosive guffaw. It required a superhuman effort, bolstered by his recollection of Nero Wolfe's sage advice, never insult the client before the check clears. "Well, okay, soup, yes, venison soup," she capitulated. "And mineral water, please. And the special vitamin salad, and whole grain bread, and make sure it comes with low-fat butter," she added breathlessly. The waiter departed with a shrug. In the silence that followed, Harris's imagination scrolled through a seemingly endless parade of travel encounters dating back 2 decades. It was not a pretty picture. Failing to find an encouraging image to stiffen his resolve, he took temporary refuge in the amusing notion of inviting Tweety to a New Year's Eve party. Perhaps they would serve suffering succotash in honor of the occasion, Harris mused, or at least make it sweat a little. Humor, or what passed for it, was just one weapon in the fearsome arsenal Harris had developed over the years to distance himself from the world. He largely succeeded, but it wasn't enough. He wasn't happy. He still longed for the serendipitous romance that had always eluded him. Despite prodigious experience to the contrary, he remained steadfast in his belief that it was out there somewhere waiting just for him. When the waiter passed by again, Tweety pointed to the Gellert Hill and asked, "Is it possible to climb up there?" "Bus is better," he said. "But I want to climb," she said, making an itsy-bitsy spider gesture with her fingers. "You know, exercise," she exclaimed, wildly pumping her arms in the yuppie power walker style. Harris maintained his composure by clamping a death grip on the arm of the chair. "Whatever you want," the waiter said, turning away. "Now I want dessert," she said before he could escape. "Dessert?" "I want the cheese dumplings filled with treacled apples and smothered in blueberry sauce." After a brief pause, she added, "And 2 large scoops of vanilla ice cream on the side with extra blueberry sauce." The waiter looked incredulous. "I've been good and I deserve a reward," she explained brightly. "I also want coffee, but no sugar. Sugar is not good for you." At last, the truth, Harris mumbled triumphantly to himself as the waiter departed with a shrug. Meanwhile, Tweety sat bolt upright in her chair, exposing her gleaming teeth and rotating her head from side to side. Harris was struck by how much she looked like a lighthouse with Bucky Beaver as the beacon. He almost started singing the Ipana Brusha 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 toothpaste jingle. Instead, he fired up the cigar with his last cedar match and puffed 3 concentric smoke rings into the dead air. Then, rising majestically from his chair, he proceeded down the stairs and ventured forth into the night, secure in the knowledge that he would soon meet one of Aphrodite's sacred servants somewhere on the road to the temple. "What an odd man," Tweety whispered to herself. "Nice jacket, though."